Welcome to Life of Die, the podcast which discusses all things role-playing and wargaming related. To coincide with the release of Cyberpunk 2077, we are continuing our look at the pen and paper role-playing game Cyberpunk 2020, and this time we're going to be focusing on character creation. And joining me in this latest podcast is regular friend Craig.
Hello.
So probably the first thing that should be considered before getting into Cyberpunk for me, from a GM's point of view, would be that I'd like to know what kind of campaign that the players want to play, essentially. And one of the things about Cyberpunk 2020 is that you can actually play, there's a whole lot of options about the different types of team that you can play. And some GMs, I would imagine, and I'm probably guilty of it myself, probably have an idea of what kind of campaign they want to run for Cyberpunk. But I think it's a good thing to try and find out from your players first what it is that they want from it, because if you write your own thing and that doesn't interest them in the slightest, you're not going to get a good response from your players. So I'll just run quickly through some of the options that you have for teams. You've got the corporate teams, who are essentially hired by a particular multinational company, getting involved with kind of corporate wars and assassinations, that kind of thing, but probably get caught up as well in some internal executive backstabbing, I would imagine. Especially if you want to make it interesting, that there's people even on their own side that are out to get them as well, because maybe they're trying to rise up through the ranks themselves or whatever. So that's the corporate teams. You've got bands, which essentially you're like a music band, a rock band, who go about on tour and get into adventures in between and sometimes during gigs. You've got the trauma team, which are their licensed medical teams, and they essentially fly around in kind of huge hover vehicles, and they've got like miniguns and so on, and they touch down usually in the middle of firefights and try and rescue the people who are insured for them to pick up. So that's what they do. The mercenaries, pretty much self-explanatory, freelance hired guns, and yeah, they can pretty much work for them. Although I would always say it's a good idea to try and have them hired by different sides in a particular battle, and then you could have both sides playing off against each other. That's always an interesting dynamic to bring to a role-playing game. You've also got various different gangs. You've got street gangs, who are essentially punks hanging about the streets, getting in gang fights. But you can also have things like neighbourhood protection, where you're trying to protect your neighbourhood or your family or your extended family if you're like a nomad pack, which we're just about to come to. You could also be anti-authoritarian protesters, people that are out to try and bring down either the corporations or the government or whatever, the police. And it would probably be quite a relevant one for today's society. We've seen a bit of that. But yeah, you can do, there's examples of gangs. You've got the Nomad Pack, which I just referred to there, which is essentially a bit like the community, and if you've seen Mad Max 2 or even Mad Max Fury, there's communities in there where it's like they essentially drive about in cars and bikes. Yeah, it's a bit like Mad Max. They're not typically, certainly in the rulebook, it doesn't really give you much information about it. It tells you about Night City in the rulebook, which is pretty much, like Blade Runner or Mega City 1, or, one of these cities you see, maybe like the Fifth Element be another good example. But it mentions for the Nomad Packs that it's out in the wasteland, so that it's maybe like Judge Dredd, I don't know, where it's never really clarified, where it seems to be that there's the kind of mega city, as it were, and then suddenly there's wastelands as well.
Yeah, certainly from the gameplay footage I've seen, there is elements of Cyberpunk 2077 that you can go outside of the city, and it looks it looks like your typical desert wasteland, ash wastes type environment. So I'm guessing there's quite a lot of kind of design space there for plagiarizing those kind of archetypes, I guess.
Nothing wrong with that. I think all art steals from other art. Usually all the best stuff does anyway. Mm-hmm. As well as that, you've also got cops. Bob, who's not with us tonight, it was on the last podcast he had us playing as cops, and we were sent out. Essentially, it was totally corrupt. The cops were pretty much hired by the corporations to do their dirty work. So yeah, we found ourselves doing jobs that we didn't want to do, rather than solving kind of what you would expect kind of typical crime to be, robberies and things like that. So it tended to be that we were brought in by the corporates.
Mm-hmm.
could do either way, and you could do a mixture. Actually, always totally valid.
Yeah, I mean, until you mentioned it there, I actually forgot that we were meant to be cops in that campaign. And in fairness, my character was a kind of media attachment to that team. So yeah, I think again, even with the cops team, there's, if someone's determined not to be a cop, you can kind of fit that in a little bit, I guess.
Definitely, and it's a totally corrupt world anyway. So yeah, I think that's actually quite a fun aspect. You would definitely want the cops to be corrupt and not really up to any good, and potentially having run-ins with each other as well, because if they're all out for themselves, and it's, they might see other cops as muscling in their patch and whatever deeds they're up to behind the scenes as well. Speaking of medias, because you did, medias, you can have a media team, which are journalists who are looking to, break stories about crimes or, corruption or any of the kind of big things, bad things usually, as news tends to be. Yeah, that have been going on in Night City or whatever setting it is. Sometimes you could be sent, it's assumed that there's other places in the world, not just the city, so you could be travelling to other countries, sometimes at the behest of one corporation, and send you into foreign territory to raid something there, that kind of thing. Which is an interesting one as well, because it means that you're out of your bubble because you don't know the territory you're going to. Once you know a city, the rough layout of it, you probably get comfortable with what you can expect and what you don't expect. So yeah, that's a good way of mixing up the game as well. So yeah, that's the kind of main teams. I mean, what's your feeling? Is there any of those that you naturally gravitate towards as a player yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some obvious ones which are probably easier to play and easier to get a group together for. So I think mercenaries, gangs, nomad pack are kind of all kind of similar. They've got a bit of a similar feel about them. Cops again is one that's probably easier because there's not, it's naturally a team in real life. There's different skill sets within that. So even as a cops team, you could still have, like we had in ours, like a media attachment. You could still have fixers or your CIs on the street that are involved. I think it's probably quite a hard one to either design a campaign around or to potentially GM. If it was something like a media team or a trauma team or even a band, like I think role playing a band sounds quite cool on paper, but I'm not cool enough in real life to pull it off. So I think it'd be difficult to role play it. And who has to be the drummer is also a question that would come up, or like the groupie, I guess, as well. It could be a rough ride for somebody playing that role.
But Craig, that's the whole point of role playing. You're supposed to put yourself in.
Yeah, no, I get it. Oh, I sort of get it. That's my caveat. I think I still need to fully engage in role playing to get more involved.
No, that's fair enough. I suppose what I would say about that is I would agree that bands are probably kind of tricky, because what's the story? Do you know what I mean? Like your overall story, but I suppose is about your growth as a band, potentially starting out, at tiny gigs for, where there's 20 people turning up or whatever, and hopefully ending up as mega stars at stadiums. But what is it you're trying to do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I think everyone I know that plays role playing games, it tends to be that kind of typical band meets in a tavern. Or that's the wrong word to use in this case. A group of people, meet in a tavern. They've all got different skill sets, and then they pick up a kind of a quest.
It probably has a kind of overlap with, we're going to get into this in a minute, the fixer characters who are street dealers. So I could imagine, like, you would have a manager, so you've got a story, you've got some kind of story, some kind of base they're trying to push you, and they're throwing you into gigs that are maybe dangerous and things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, the more I think about it now, it does actually sound like it'd be quite a fun one to do. I don't think it'd be something you'd want to play for years and years.
Hmm.
Potentially, it's maybe quite a good kind of one for like a one shot, or a couple of sessions to kind of go through it. But yeah, just personally, I don't feel like it's something I could really get that into. But I'd be keen to see it. I'd be keen to see how it works. And obviously, it's key to the whole cyberpunk aesthetic, and it's kind of pretty well fleshed out in the rules and stuff. So I think it is. The rules will support you on that if that's the way that your group wants to go.
Yeah, definitely. I think I agree with you that I think you said the media team, didn't you? That's kind of difficult.
Yeah, that's another tough one.
I can see how it could work. I suppose it would depend on whether you want to go for the full experience, in which case, at the end of every adventure, you should be doing like a report to camera, as it were. So you would essentially be doing a presentation to the group.
Yeah.
I think that would be problematic for a lot of players. Unless, of course, they went away and wrote it up and, sent it, you could do it that way and send it on to everybody.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many players are that engaged that they want to do.
Exactly. It's just, I can imagine there's people out there that love doing all that, but I don't know. For me, the kind of escapism of playing an RPG is a lot of the time it's a fine balance of action and a narrative, and if it's effectively like working a second job where you've got to get reports in on time for your hard ass boss or whatever, then it doesn't sound like escapism to me. But yeah, certainly playing as a, well, we can talk about the individual characters in a bit, but certainly playing as a media in the last campaign we did, I found it difficult to stay in character a lot of the time because certainly in that kind of traditional action RPG type campaign as we played, it's there's a lot of potential for shooting or for action, and if you're a media type, then you're potentially not going to be standing on top of a sky rise with a minigun and hosing people down. So yeah, it just requires a bit of tweaking. I think in the end we kind of worked out, and I was kind of reluctant at first to get involved in the action, but as stakes were raised, I was able to fumble for my 38 special and take out some punks. But yeah, it's not necessarily, it's definitely not my first choice or the first thing I think about when I would start looking at characters or a campaign.
The one team that I really don't like the idea of is a trauma team, because I really don't get what it is you're supposed to do with that. The trauma team fly in their hover tank. They've got miniguns on it, which is cool. They've got solos, which will, because they're dropping into the middle of firefights and they're picking up wounded people. But that's really it. The med techies, as they're called, they kind of fix them up. They get them back to the hospital, fix them up.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you're playing something that's a bit like trying to recreate like a futuristic ER,
Yeah.
I don't quite understand what it is you're supposed to do with that.
Yeah, again, I think it could totally work as a small scale thing for a few sessions, like yeah, because it'd be like playing like MASH or ER or even some of the kind of more recent war movies involving like the parajumpers and kind of combat medics and that kind of thing, which is it's a cool it's a cool job enough to make big Hollywood movies about it. Um, but yeah, like you say, it's a tough one because you're kind of limited in what the scope of the mission's going to be and what's expected of you as a character.
Just actually, as we're talking about it here, it's actually occurred to me that maybe one thing you could do, and it would need the players to buy into this idea, but you could essentially have a central team, that you play most weeks, whether it's nomads or whether it's a street gang or mercenaries, whatever it is, that you do that main campaign, but then occasionally there's like a kind of there's one shots that intersperse, and then maybe the one shot is still set in the same universe and the same, like, everything that yous have been doing, if that makes sense, in the game. But yous come in just playing this different team, like the trauma team or cops or the media or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and showing a different perspective on the world.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, actually. Yeah. So I could imagine if one of the main characters was severely injured or something, and you could fly in the med tech team and then have that played out. The kind of saving of their life or the attempted saving of their life happens in real time from another character's perspective. That'd be quite cool. Yeah. Again, I think as you say, the way it's getting buy-in from players, I think if you've got an established group and you're kind of you've played through the kind of more archetypal, everyone's their own kind of individual. Yeah. Going for a kind of team-based game could be quite interesting. I just think it's maybe not one you do cold with a new group.
Yeah. I mean, in general terms, I would still expect, even though I'm saying what kind of team are you, that's more about like what it is that the players want to achieve and what kind of organisation they want to be part of, whether they want to be, as I say, like you could be protesters, so you're not even part of anything, you're just trying to stand up to the kind of corruption and corporate entities and all that kind of thing. You could start, could be that kind of right at the bottom thing, or you could be, a corporate team who's working for one of these ones and trying to figure out, maybe you're trying to do some harm from the inside, I don't know, or rather than just going along with the status quo, as it were. So within each
Mm.
of these bands, I don't mean that you should be like for cops, you should all be cops as a character type or all be media.
Yeah.
Each of these teams should still have a kind of variety of characters in them. Obviously, if you've got a mercenary team, you're probably going to be mostly solos, but there is always like gaps there that are kind of good to have different characters to come in and plug.
Yeah, I think the only slight risk with that, and maybe it was kind of happened a little bit in our last campaign, was if if we're all corrupt cops and there's a media person in the team, they might be given the cold shoulder a little bit, and maybe not. They might not get them involved in all of the missions, or
Hmm.
all of the kind of splitting up the drug bust money or whatever, that kind of thing. Or if you're a fixer, you maybe they might not be involved in every mission going as well. So yeah, I guess it depends just how much willingness there is to split the party on occasion and have kind of branching stories for characters.
Well, I don't know if it would be necessary just because a fixer might not. Just say, for example, they were thrown into a corporate team and they were to infiltrate an enemy corporation's building or something like that. Just because the fixer doesn't have anything specific to do, I don't think it necessarily doesn't mean that he's kept out of the game. He should still be coming along for the fight and for all that. So
Yeah,
I think you can still have weeks where there's the kind of reason for your character, I suppose, isn't necessarily there all the time. It's a job of the GM to make sure that all of the characters get their chance to use their
yeah,
abilities
absolutely.
whenever necessary. So
Yeah, and I think that's what we discovered in the last campaign. I think that's what we discovered was that although it didn't often make sense for the media guy to be there, an extra gun in the fight or whatever is always welcome, especially in the brutal world of Cyberpunk 2020. And I guess as long as it doesn't break anyone's immersion or whatever, then just go for it.
yeah. So I think we'll get straight into the actual character types now because we are kind of using a few terms which for the uninitiated probably doesn't mean anything. So there's a number of different kind of key characters that you can play in Cyberpunk, and I'm just going to run through briefly what it is each character type is, and each one's got a special ability. So the first one are the Rocker Boys, who, as we were kind of alluding to there, are essentially like a rock band, or either singers or guitarists or drummers or whatever it is. And so the thing that's quite interesting, this game came out in 1990, and to me, the archetype band that springs to mind about what they're looking for, and this is Rage Against the Machine, who came out about 2 years later, because it definitely is kind of with a slant that it's their place to challenge authority.
All the while on the payroll of a mega as well.
Well, that's true, and that's true. Rage Against the Machine, they were, I think Sony was there.
Sony,
I like them, so I'm not going to slag them off any
no,
further.
me too. I know.
um, the ability that the Rocker Boy has, once they start getting followers, they can essentially drive the crowd into a bit of a frenzy and have them as their own private army. The way I would run it, and I think it is described in the section about the special abilities, is that it's really just in the aftermath of the gig. Once you whip them into this frenzy, that you can set them off. And so I wouldn't say that it means that you've necessarily got permanent followers. It's just really in the moment because everybody's probably off their head and drinking, and in this world there's a lot of drug use as well. So yeah, it'd probably just be the fact that they're just off their head in the first place, and that they're willing to join their idols on a rampage through the streets or wherever it happens to be. So that kind of covers the Rocker Boys. The solos, probably, if you're into the combat side of the game, and the combat side of the game is really important. Solos are hired assassins, bodyguards, killers, and soldiers, essentially combat specialists. I don't necessarily, I don't know, maybe you'll disagree with me here, Craig, but I don't find the solo as interesting a character to play, but at the same time, from a game perspective, they're like great.
Yeah, I think if you're not too fussed with the narrative element of it, or if you've got something stored away for one that you could use, I think in terms of just playing like Friday Night Firefight week in week out, they're the obvious choice to go
Mm.
for. And if you just like rolling dice and you know that's the way to go.
Yep. Friday Night Firefight, by the way, is the combat rules in Cyberpunk 2020 for him that's not in the know. The ability that the solos get is combat sense, and the reason that's such an important ability is that there's a kind of initiative pecking order, and that ability boosts your ref, which is the stat that kind of determines how quickly you react. And essentially, all solos are going to act before anybody else is because they've got this ability. And the combat is really deadly in Cyberpunk, so that's why the solo and their ability, the combat sense, is so important to actual battles in the game and gameplay, because it is so lethal that you can die relatively easy compared to certainly a number of systems that we're all familiar, the two of us are familiar with. I think this is up there with some of the most unforgiving, although I would say maybe Aliens potentially worse.
Yeah, it can go quite south quickly in Alien just through stress and that kind of mechanic.
Yeah.
But yeah, the combat, definitely getting shot in Cyberpunk 2020 can be fatal, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, and especially when you fumble, Craig.
Yeah, full auto is not to be trifled with.
Yeah, we'll maybe mention that later on as well. I'll come back to that. Netrunners is the next type of character. I have to say that this is a character that I don't want to see in the game, and the reason why, I like the idea of it, and I think there's a lot of thought that's went into what the Netrunners are and how it all works. But in practice, what happens is when a Netrunner, sorry, the purpose of the Netrunners is that they're computer hackers. They enter the virtual realm. They literally travel into the...
Yeah, it's kind of Lawnmower Man-esque, that kind of idea of projecting your avatar into kind of another digital realm, that kind of,
Yeah. But as your consciousness as well that's going on, is the way I understand it. But the problem with it is that when that happens, the Netrunner it's essentially like a kind of grid, and there's enemy programs, and the Netrunner has programs that they use against these to neutralize them. And so what happens is that the rest of the team are playing one game, and the Netrunner's playing a separate game.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work. It just kind of breaks up the whole thing. It's maybe interesting as a one-off, but I think if you were going to have Netrunners, you're much better just having the whole team as Netrunners, and it's like you're all working together to try and get through those things. But for me, I wouldn't miss a Netrunner if he wasn't there, and I'm sorry to everybody that's worked in the game if anybody's listening to this, because I can see that there's so much effort, and it's interesting to read, definitely, in the rules.
Yeah, it's a big part of the genre. Obviously, it's a big part of like some Neuromancer, etc. But it's maybe just not handled in the way that makes it fun for the other players. And then again, there's probably more modern ways to do it now. I would imagine there's probably more streamlined ways of integrating. If it was just if they maybe cut it down to a series of skill checks or a slightly more mini game,
Yeah,
it might be easier to integrate it. Because I think not having them in a team, not having a Netrunner on your team is probably you're probably missing out on a lot of opportunities for for classic cyberpunk scenarios, like hacking into mainframes and disabling security systems and all that kind of stuff. But as you say, if it's just no fun in gameplay terms, then why would you do it? So yeah, that's definitely one I'd look at house ruling some way, even if it is just having some kind of. I mean, there's a whole game called Netrunner from Fantasy Flight, which is a kind of exactly that mini game expanded into a kind of
card game, is it?
opposed card game. Yeah, it's like a card game, kind of Magic the Gathering style. So even if they could do something like that quickly on the fly, might be better. But
I can agree with you. I mean, I think the skill checks would be the way to go with it, and you just have a series of programs, and you decide which one. Potentially there's one program in your way, and you use your Netrunner ability. Interfaces the Netrunner's ability, which essentially helps them when they're using these programs against, and they're hacking into these kind of systems.
yeah, I mean, it's odd they didn't. It's an odd omission as well that they're missing as a team of Netrunners, because you could see if there was a team of Netrunners, you could maybe build some kind of narrative around it and not have it that they're all just playing the mini games for the whole the whole session. That they're actually doing things like using other skills to bypass stuff as if they were in the physical world, that kind of thing. That could be quite interesting. but again, I guess that would be not net running at that point. You'd just be playing a normal campaign inside a virtual world or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. There's ways of doing it, I think.
I mean, the way that I've traditionally got around this is that you hire a netrunner, an NPC, and it means that it's good and bad. It basically means that you just don't have to worry about any of that side of things. You hire a netrunner to hack into the corporate system, unlock the doors for you as you're making your way through the building. But then I suppose the downside of that is it's then at the GM's whim whether or not you could you do roles if you want to go there, but it really depends on the GM what happens rather than the players what happens would be the downside of it. But yeah, always to me that was always a reasonable fix for it, which just you hire them. I mean that's the thing when it comes down to it, you're really doing things like that, like unlocking the doors in the building, locking the lifts, all these kind of things, security protocols. These were all things that the netrunner could do once they get access to a system. So yeah, I don't know. Are you missing out on that much by doing that kind of stuff? I don't know.
I mean, I think so. I think there's definitely some fun to be had in that role if you think to like films like Mission Impossible or other kind of spy movies, that kind of thing, where you're infiltrating a corporate tower and you've got someone who is just unlocking the doors as they come up to them and disabling security cameras and on ad hoc on the fly as the other team moving through the building, and there's a chance that you might forget to do one or have trouble with a door, and it can build some tension. I think that's a quite an interesting scenario, and it's just a bit of a shame that if you can't do it. I mean, I think there's still, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is still things that players can do to open doors, security skills and computer skills, but it's not quite the same as having that dedicated resource on it.
Yeah, I think the next category, the techie, probably could do things like that, because you're running about with a toolkit. You can repair computers, you can repair equipment. I don't see why, if it was a kind of keypad door, that a techie couldn't overrun that. So yeah, that's really what they're about. And they've got the jury rig ability, which I'm not mad in it, but it means that you can, from memory, it's you can build gadgets and you can repair gadgets and potentially combine them as well, I suppose, and make something interesting. So I suppose if you're into that, if you liked the A-Team as a kid, then I think that would probably be quite a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's the kind of sub-branch of techies is med techies, which is medics. They've got medical tech, which is essentially, as you'd expect, it helps them heal people. So
yeah, I think they're fairly essential. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're really helpful. Yeah, they're really helpful in your team. A med techie, definitely, as I said, because it's so deadly. And then that brings us on to the media. And media is journalists, so you're out there. You'll be broadcasting things to the nation or to a small region, or depending on what your GM allows you to be part of. And yeah, I actually quite like the idea of it. I do actually like the media as a character. It's just tricky to do that if you're actually going to get really into it, to do the delivery of your report, because at some point in the game you really should be doing a report to camera or something along those lines. And his ability is his credibility, which is it's about the ability to be believed by your viewers and like everyone, and it's kind of critical to get your story out there. So it is important with that. And there's all of these skills, all these kind of specialist skills have degrees of how good you can be with them. We'll maybe talk about that shortly as well. The next type of character is cops. So I think we've kind of probably explained them pretty well already. They tend to be hired out quite often. The corporates will, they bought the police off, so you potentially would have to abort missions because of that, and there'll be a lot of corruption involved in the cops of the cyberpunk world. Yeah, was it the authority they've got, which helps you from memory, intimidating people from memory?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah. So it represents their ability to call on the forces of the law and government to get what they want. So you can use authority to question people, and once you get a really high authority, then you can start busting people that are really important figures. But until you're at that stage, you're probably just going to get told by your captain, he's not getting locked up, beat it. That's pretty much the way of it, I would imagine. You've then got the corporates, who are the the guys in suits, the Burks of the world. If you're familiar with Aliens, that's pretty much what they are. They're kind of tend to be kind of sleazeballs and yeah, out for themselves, out for to boost their own standing in the company and their personal wealth as a consequence. Their ability is
Resources.
resources. Yep. Aye, so they can basically get the kind of company to back them up. So if you get poor resources, you can maybe get a company car, but potentially you might be able to get call upon the company's team of solos or that kind of thing. So I think you quite like those characters, don't you, Craig?
I've came around to it. Yeah, I've had similar characters in the past. I don't think it's always been me that I've not gravitated towards them, but yeah, somehow just slip right into them like a glove.
I'm not saying you're a sleazeball, but I think they're kind of quite interesting characters to play because I know not all players like this, but I do quite like a bit of
conflict.
Niggle. Yeah, a bit of conflict in the team. That there are people working against each other.
Yeah, I think you need to try to fine line with it. Yeah, you need to try to fine line with it, and again dial it back every so often for the sake of the group not falling out in real life, that kind of thing. But yeah, it is quite a cool dynamic to have someone who's maybe not looking out for the best interest of the team and looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
And certainly.
Well, I like it as well myself. You know
Yeah,
that.
of course.
I've done it a few times.
Absolutely.
So then we've got fixers, which I really enjoyed playing a fixer when I was playing it in Bob's campaign. The fixers are basically kind of street dealers, so they can be dealing drugs. They can be, but mostly they're going to be dealing, maybe arms and probably information is really the main thing that they're dealing in. So it's what the word on the street, as it were. And maybe you're too young to remember it, but Starsky and Hutch springs to mind with Huggy Bear.
Yeah.
That kind of character.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of fun. I always really liked that character on Starsky and Hutch. I actually thought he was more interesting than the two main characters.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And yeah, Street Deal is his special ability, which basically means it's how easy it is for him to gather information about things that are going on and the kind of level of information they can get. But yeah, I always think they're really interesting characters, the fixers. You can do different things when. Essentially, I played Clarence Bodica when I was playing a fixer. I don't know if you saw it that way or not at the time.
Yeah, certainly got. Yeah, there was an air of psychosis about it. I'm not sure if that was.
I just like doing his voice.
Yeah.
Bodica's got going. And the last character type is are the nomads, who are pretty much Mad Max. That's who they are. That's exactly what they are. They drive about in these kind of caravans of trucks and bikes and buggies and whatever kind of vehicles they can get their hands on. They drive about, and the whole pack is seen as a family, which I think is quite an interesting dynamic. It's a good one. Going back to what we were talking about, the teams, the Nomad pack is a good one because you're all really family to each other. Then if you're all part of the pack, and that's speaking of family. That's exactly what the special ability is. So you can call upon your Nomad pack to back you in whatever mission you are doing, whether it's in the form of weapons, cash, or information, or even some backup as well. So yeah, I think that's quite a fun type. It could be an interesting campaign. I personally would prefer that they maybe were coming in and out of the city. I wouldn't really want. I don't know if I could find driving through the wastelands to be a particularly interesting campaign. If that makes sense. I mean, it'd be a bit of a kind of like a road movie story. You're moving from one place to another.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could have it as some kind of subterranean thing. You could have them living in the sewers maybe and traveling across the city via the sewers or something like that. But then, yeah, I don't know. Not sure how I'd play that one.
Yeah, I think it would be fine to have the pack actually, driving into the city and causing absolute chaos and carnage. I think would be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's it. That's the kind of main. That's not the main ones. That's all your options. As these are the different character types in Cyberpunk. And to be honest, my gripes about the Netrunner aside, I think they're all actually quite fun characters if you can find a way into each one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there are ways into most of them. So.
And their kind of key skills or their character skills,
special abilities.
Special abilities, yeah. I mean, each of those can have a massive game effect.
Definitely.
So yeah, no, they're all pretty well balanced.
So moving on, once you pick your character type, one of the things I find really interesting about Cyberpunk is that it has a kind of fairly extensive character creation, and I don't mean that in terms of there is about the skills, the number of skills you can get, and weapons and equipment and cybernetics. But before you even get to that, there's what's called the life path, and this is a bit as I come with my GM hat on. I just love this. I really, really love it. I think it's a great kind of element to the game because it makes the players create a kind of fully realised background before they even start. And the reason I think that's a great thing as a GM is that it means that you've got things that you can call up from their past and bring into the game, and that character, that player, will go, "Oh, that the GM did that." To me, that's what I'm always trying to do. Is I always want my players to feel like I've done things in the game for them, if that makes sense, to make it feel like this is about you. It's not just about the team, it's about each one of you. And to me, Cyberpunk with this background system actually creates something really cool for the GM. Whether or not players will enjoy it as much, having to kind of think out their background is kind of detailed as this, I don't know. But that's why I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, Cyberpunk 2020 was my introduction to pen and paper RPGs, so it was good for me to not have to. It gives you, it allows you to essentially roll for kind of starters or hints as to what your background could be, and piece it together from that. And I guess as long as you've got a little bit of an inkling about what sort of character you want, you can build upon the things you roll up. So no, I think it is really good, especially and as you say, it's an invaluable tool for the GM, or it's an invaluable resource for the GM to have this sort of information, which I can imagine is probably quite hard to draw out of some players sometimes in other systems.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems as a GM, I know you've only been at the player side of the table, but if the players don't really give you anything to kind of work off of, all you can really do is try and make the scenario as interesting as you can in a general kind of sense. But you don't. It's very hard to do that thing that I was talking about, where you want the players to feel like I've actually written this for you.
Hmm.
You know, like you want each player around the table. Well, I do. I want each player around the table to feel that this is for them personally, and everyone should get their kind of moment in the sun, if you like, where it's like, all right, that's to do with this thing that I'm trying to do with my character, or that thing that happened in the past.
Hmm.
And I can understand why there's some players just maybe like the combat side of the game more than they like the role playing, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's just that that's the case. And so perhaps there probably are some players out there who just like the rolling of the dice, and so really what they want when they do a character creation is they just want stats because that's the important bit of the game for them.
Hmm.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, but
Yeah,
it makes it hard for the GM certainly to personalise anything for that character. If the player's not telling you anything about their background, and if they're not engaging in the role playing side so much.
yeah. I think this sort of way of doing it, the way that Cyberpunk 2020 does, like it might bring people out of their shell a little bit that would have normally been in that reluctant camp. Well, it kind of forces you to do it, so I guess there's that. But even then, it probably maybe changes their opinion a little bit on character creation for other RPGs as well, and for other systems, and makes them a bit more involved. I certainly think that's how it worked for me. I mean, obviously, as I say, I came in old to Cyberpunk, so I've not really got anything to base it on prior to that, but I certainly wasn't too bothered about character creation first time around. I think I probably was more interested in the dice rolling aspect.
I suppose you had nothing, no kind of thing to compare it to, I suppose, so you had no expectations. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
maybe
Uh,
if you'd done something like, Star Wars, which is fairly quick and easy to create a character in Star Wars, because all it is going out, if tells you all your stats, and it just says put some dice on these skills, and it actually gives you a pre-generated background.
yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, at all.
No, no.
Uh, the pre-generated backgrounds are actually quite helpful.
I think it does give you a bit. I think doing it this way though probably gives you a bit more of appreciation for it, for the characters, and maybe yeah, it gives you a bit more.
And into your character.
Yeah, it makes your character yours rather than just something you've rolled up or thrown points to. I do think I think I've definitely matured a bit more in role playing over the years, where I now don't really. I think there's a bit more of a balance, or I prefer a bit more of a balance between the narrative and the action. Certainly, I basically just think if you're really into the rolling of the dice and the combat, better ways to do that. You know, you could just play a tabletop war game or something
Mhm.
and get that out of your system. Yeah, you need. I think you need to have some sort of balance between character and action.
I think in general terms, I like to try and get it roughly 50-50
Hmm.
in a session. I don't know if it comes across that way when you've played sessions of mine or not.
Yeah, no, it generally does.
I certainly try and have role playing. I want role playing in every session. That's a definite, and I don't want it to be a combat simulator really, because like you say, we've got interest in lots of war games, and we can do that. So that's not really to me the kind of. I think if you're a GM, you're probably somebody that would quite like to write a book, or
Hmm.
you're certainly a storyteller, is what I think. And for me, the most important thing in any role playing game is that there's a good story and that the players get involved in it, and they hopefully shape it and hopefully push it in ways that I mean, happens pretty much most sessions. The players do things that I don't expect them to do. Some are problems because you're really having to think on your feet and trying to frantically bring things back to where you wanted them, if that's what you were doing. But then sometimes you can try and think on your feet. I maybe talk about this in Star Wars, because there was one session where something happened that completely threw everything off that I'd never seen coming, and I managed to work my way around, and it came to a kind of I actually managed to deal with what the kind of massive curveball that the the team threw at me.
That's an interesting one because I don't think I've ever seen you flustered. Really?
Well, I was in the other end of the line, so you didn't see me getting flustered.
Ah, okay. So it's a recent one, was it? Okay.
It was a recent one. Yeah, we'll talk about it in one of the Star Wars podcasts.
No, no, that sounds like a good one for that. Yeah, yeah. But I think that's well, again, it's maybe more of a general topic, but that's one of the interesting things about pen and paper RPGs and interacting with other people who potentially are playing not they're playing the same campaign, but they're playing a different game in their head, or they're playing a different type of character in their head.
Hmm.
From the one you've rolled up, you might have it in your head that there's some kind of, strict hardcore sci-fi cyberpunk kind of Blade Runner style movie, and they might be thinking more in their head that this is a kind of anime or a bit more of a kind of cartoony kind of thing. And I guess as a player, there's a certain amount of maturity to be gained from taking joy in other people's experiences and not getting frustrated when someone doesn't play the way you want to, rather than at primary school or playgroup. But yeah, playing well with others and not always getting your own way is probably a really good life lesson that playing RPGs with real people does give you.
And one of the things that you said earlier on about people who are, maybe would be quiet in general terms and maybe not that confident and would, not get into characters. I mean, to be honest, I think that's part of the reason why I play such when I do play games, I tend to play characters that are quite loud and aggressive, because I think the reason for it is because I'm not really like that in life.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm talking quite confidently here at the moment, but I think in general terms, if I'm in social circles, particularly if it's a kind of large thing, I tend to be quite quiet and just kind of stand in the periphery and listen most of the time. It's not that I'm not interested, I am, but
Yeah.
I think it's a confidence thing. So I think when I get around a role playing table, I kind of overcompensate for that, and that kind of I tend to play characters who are extremely confident and very sure about how important they are and all that thing. So I think there is probably an element of trying to counter how I potentially I think I am in real life.
Yeah, I think I think I'm similar. Also depends how much I've been drinking during a session as well. Can have a massive effect on the character's personality as well. Funnily enough, but yeah, it's one of those ones you see all the time when we used to play in amongst other groups as well, and that were playing their own RPGs in the same room or the same pub or whatever, and you'd kind of see the quietest mouse in the group would suddenly be more or less standing on the table shouting at some point during the session, which is good to see. It's good. It is a good release of that pent up inner personality, maybe that for some people they don't get to use very often. So
Yeah. I didn't expect us to get into psychology tonight, so that's a nice box tick there.
No, I think that's a whole other podcast. I think that one.
So I'm just going to run through some of the things that you can customize. I'm not going to read this verbatim because there's far too much of it.
Yeah, it's quite chart heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, so the things you can obviously ask your kind of ethnic origin. It's a bit like Blade Runner Los Angeles, where there's all sorts of different values in the city.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's I don't know if it's ahead of its time in that regard, or if it's maybe no longer PC or whatever. But it's
Yeah, it's true. You could get yourself into hot water if you were in certainly if you were playing in a public place.
yeah. I think I mean that's one. Is that one that you choose, or is that one you roll for? I can't remember.
No, you can choose. Yeah, you can choose. I think most of this background stuff you can choose, which is a good thing. So yeah, you can choose that, and it's up to you what you want to do. But yeah, you should be careful about that stuff with your group about what they find acceptable and what they won't find acceptable. So it gives you lots of ideas as well, customizing your clothes, your hairstyle, other things like tattoos, mirror shades. That you've got to have mirror shades if you're playing Cyberpunk. That's just
absolutely. It shouldn't even be an option not to have it.
Yeah, it's not. I know scars, gloves, things like that. So yeah, it gives you some. It's the kind of thing you would probably I imagine that the computer game. I'm pretty sure it does. I'm sure I heard this that it does allow you to completely customize the look of your character. So
yeah, I think it goes. Without giving too much away, I think it goes quite deep into that. Maybe a bit more so than you'd want people to see. But yeah,
But,
I've seen some interesting clips.
yeah, so you can do all those things. Although certain options in the game in the computer game don't seem to be covered here. But anyway, we'll move on in that. So getting into the kind of background thing, which is about I was talking about earlier on, I think is really interesting. So it depends what your family background that you're from, whether your parents were corporate types, if you're part of the nomad pack like we talked about earlier on, or perhaps you're in a crime family. These are all options. It asks you about your parents, so you can choose or roll one. You can, did something happen to them? Were they murdered? Did you not remember them? Did you lose them and you're still looking for them? These kind of things. It also gives you a family status where you can have. It says things about your childhood environment, where it was you grew up, siblings, which brothers and sisters you've got, how they feel about you. And yeah, there's family tragedies, which are always interesting things for, again, that's one of the key ones for the GM. Always good to have a family tragedy in the background to dredge up at some point and have your players have that moment where the light bulb goes off. Oh, that's to do with me. That's to do with me. So that's thing. Then you move on to we've got motivation. So it's things that what is it drives your character? What will you back up your friends or will you go for out for yourself? What is it that's important to you? In my case, I've played quite a few very selfish characters who, at the drop of a hat, will turn on the team, which isn't a great. I should maybe caveat that I don't ever do anything where I want to see cause the deaths of any other characters, but I would quite happily work against them for my character's own personal profit. But if it came to the stage where the actions of me as a player were to get somebody else killed, I would actually stop the play and say to the GM, like, no, because I would try. Usually I discuss this stuff with the GM and I tell them, right, this is what my character's about and what they're up to, but you don't just discriminately kill characters without them having any say or having a chance to defend themselves. That to me is you've got to have that. It's really a kind of fine line, but you've got to be really careful with it. I think it's okay to act against the characters so long as you know it's the GM's problem. If, I don't know, for example, I suppose if you were going to set some of your team up, you've got to realise that the GM's got to make that fair to everybody else. He's got to give them ways out of it. If you create something within the group that's causing attention in the game, you've got to be really, really careful with this stuff because it can just boil over and it can really upset players as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I do think the Cyberpunk universe, the same as the Alien universe, is set up for characters to be selfish and have their own, drives and things like that mean that they don't necessarily always do what's best for the team. They maybe do what's best for themselves. Having said that, it does say a lot of the time that your enemy is the corporates and the governments and the corrupt police and so on. So yeah, maybe I'm overplaying that element of it. I don't know, but maybe it's just because that's what I gravitate towards doing. I don't know. So yeah, the motivations, you can choose or roll them, but it doesn't matter because you can just make that up yourself. You know yourself whether you're shy or if you're violent and aggressive or antisocial, these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've rolled them for the characters I've played, mostly because of that sort of stuff. It's maybe not been something that I've had in my head, fundamental to character, past romances or siblings, that aren't important to the kind of the story I've got in my head. But when you do roll it up, it gives you little threads to pull at, not just as a GM, but as a player as well, that you can kind of develop on. I think one of my first characters rolled up and he ended up having various. He turned out to be a bit of a Lothario just by the roles he got, so that ended up impacting his personality a bit more than I'd planned. And it does, yeah, it definitely helps, especially if you're either new to role playing or you're a little bit introverted generally, then it definitely can help, let's say, tug on little threads and give ideas on how to, play a character.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because normally I figure out the personality first. I usually know what it is that I'm wanting to play.
Yeah.
I mean, I will look at this applies to all games. I will, when it's these kind of, if there's character classes, like we talked about earlier on, the Rocker Boys, the Solo Fixer, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I will look at those first and I'll decide what type of character type I'm going to play. But I usually work out in my head as soon as I've picked that what their personality is, because that's the kind of bit that's most interesting to me. What's going to be interesting, what's going to be fun to role play.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is another reason why I quite like being quite animated in the game because I do feel that's part of the fun of it as well, role playing, because it is an escape from reality. And
Yeah, see, I think I come at it slightly differently. I'll tend not to be too involved in the session zero or the week zero type affair of building the character, and it won't be until maybe a couple of sessions in I've really cemented which celebrity I want to plagiarize for the remainder of the campaign, or which which character from a popular TV or movie that I want to steal. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess not for lack of creativity. I do find it hard going in cold to think of a new character that is one of the archetypes that I've either played before or generally gravitate to. And again, I think this is why the character creation in Cyberpunk is quite good, because it does not necessarily push you, but it can lean you in certain directions that you weren't necessarily thinking of, and it's to move you out your comfort zone a wee bit.
absolutely, the rules give you quite a few guidelines for motivations. So as well as asking you about your personality traits, it asks questions like, who's the person you value most? Is it parent, sibling, lover, friend, a pet? Even also asks you what you value most. Is it money, honor, knowledge, vengeance, love? How you feel about most people, like your outlook against, and there's goes from liking people to absolutely loathing them, the whole kind of spectrum there. Also ask you about your value possession. I always quite like that because I always like to have props when I'm playing. Not really necessary these days when we're restricted to the internet, but yeah, I've always liked having some kind of prop where, for example, in Cyberpunk, I got like a kind of bullet round a chain I used to wear, which was for the character. It wasn't anything I was particularly interested in wearing as such in general terms. But yeah, I always quite like that. I always feel it gives you another into the kind of psychology of your character if you've got something there that's a prop. And then you've got life events, which for every year above 16 that you are, something happens. Now, Cyberpunk is limited to your age being 16 plus 2d6. I don't like that I don't like something as firm as that. I prefer to just the players to decide what age they are. And if somebody wants to play a 60-year-old, I don't really see why they shouldn't play a 60-year-old. The one thing it would affect would be this section about the life events, because you're supposed to roll a life event for every year above 16. So if you were 60, this just becomes possible. So I would do, I would then, as a GM, would say, right, you're going to be rolling, 10 life events instead of the full, whatever that would be, 44. And so, yeah, you get the life events as well. So you get big problem. This is when you do have to roll things. So you roll dice to see whether these things happen. Do you have big problems in a given year? Did you have big wins? So sometimes you'll have disaster strikes. So it could be a betrayal or an accident, or a lover, friend, or relative was killed, hunted by the law. All sorts of different problems can happen. You can get lucky when you make a contact. You find a teacher, you get a big score in a job or gambling or something like that. You've also got friends and enemies you roll for. Sorry, I should say sorry. Like when you're rolling for this, it's you find for each year you find out. So you'll either have big problems, big wins, or friends and enemies, or romantic involvement, or nothing happened that year. So that's the kind of options within the friends and enemies. You find out who the enemy is, whether you hate them or they hate you. The flip side is that you made a friend and you've got some do the thing for the GM because it's an NPC that you as a player might just off your own back say, I want to go and see such and such because they're in my background and I want to ask them about this and what, or I want to ask them to help me. And I think that's a really good thing. You then get the romantic life, which is interesting. Don't see that much in any role playing games where you decide and you find out how it worked out. Did it end in tragedy? And that's not just necessarily that they killed off, but things like the lover was kidnapped or the lover went insane. I love that one. That's so yeah, some of that's quite dark. Sometimes there's a complication in the relationship, like there's a third party or one of you's insanely jealous of the other one. These are all things that are in there, and you have to do it. You can choose or you can roll how that played out, whether you're still in love or that relationship ended. And that's really all the background stuff. So that to me, that's the bit that I think's fantastic about it. On the more technical side of things, I'm not going to go through all of this, but how the game works is you have stats, and under each stat you have skills. And when you're going to try and do anything in Cyberpunk, you check what your stat is, and you add whatever your skill is together, the two numbers together, and then you roll a d10, and you add that to the score that you had before. And if the task is easy, you need to roll 10 or above. If it was of average difficulty, 15 and above, difficult 20, very difficult 25, and if it's nearly impossible, it's 30 or above that you have to do with these rolls. So it's very rare that you'll see a 30 roll because the stats and skills, I think the limit is 10. It's unlikely that you're going to get 30 plus. So, but that really is, without getting into the...
Yeah, it's fairly concise, isn't it? Fairly elegant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot more detail and grit than that.
Yeah.
I think there must be. I think I did count these up the other night, and there's something like 70 abilities or something. Skills rather.
Yeah, I was just having a spin through even just the core rulebook as well, with the amount of stuff in it in terms of gear and weapons and obviously your augmentations and stuff like that. It's incredible, and this is just the core book. There's obviously the add-on books or the Chrome books,
Yeah,
etc.
the Chrome books are shopping guides, and it's it's all sorts of new gear, new technologies, new gadgets.
Yeah,
it's bewildering how much stuff is in those books.
And I think that's the thing. I don't know if you want to cover that much, but I wonder how you feel it compares to maybe more modern role-playing systems that you've played, like Aliens, that kind of thing, which seems to be a bit more compact, I guess. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing having the kind of slight limitations?
It depends on your players, really. I think it comes back to that same thing we were talking about with the kind of character background. How much do you want to get into this? If you don't really want to go through this, I mean, I agree with you. I think the rulebook, the Cyberpunk 2020 rulebook, I don't think you need the Chrome books. I really don't, because I think there's so much stuff that's in this rulebook for you to customize your character. So many options that you don't really need the Chrome books, because there's plenty of stuff here that can make your character interesting, and things that you'll like and things you'll love, and some things you won't like.
I mean, I can imagine as a kid picking this up at the time, it must have been, both intimidating but also incredibly exciting just to dive into it all with the amount of detail in it.
Yeah.
And the amount of just stuff to read.
Yeah, I was really excited when I got my copy and was reading all this stuff, and I was like, oh, let's get this technology and let's get this skill and that. They can do that. That's
a young enthusiastic mind getting stuck right into it. Whereas I think for me, coming in as a jaded late 20-something at the time, perhaps, I just found it overwhelming, and I was just like, I don't know. Someone tell me, what do I want? What do I want? What do I need? And and then it also feels like one of those ones where there's not gotchas, but there's definitely things you need. There's definitely bits of gear that you want from the get-go,
mm-hmm.
and then there's stuff that's purely aesthetic. At the end of the day, it's really cool and all that kind of thing. It's a big part of the game, but you can quite easily spend your starting funds on a lot of nonsense really and end up with nothing discernible to take into a fight. Or
That's true. I mean, probably as a GM, I didn't do my job there because I think I just gave you carte blanche.
no. I think there was definitely guidance, and there was some more experienced players as well that were able to kind of point me in the right direction for that sort of stuff as well. But I just feel like, yeah, if you were coming in cold, if you were a new gaming group that picked this up and had never seen it before and nobody had played it, including the GM, it could be quite easy to get lost in the sauce quite quickly. And I just find that I think from my limited experience of other systems, I think the way they're going seems to be a lot more compact and streamlined to kind of maybe encourage new players in, or maybe it's just the kind of current generation of players that doesn't have that same willingness to dive into hundreds and hundreds of pages of stats and charts and tables on things. But then on the flip side of that, I do find it's something we'll probably cover in another session. We talk about the Alien RPG. There seems to be out of the box with that one. There's a very limited amount of things you can have in terms of your weapons lists. Maybe I think there's maybe 5 or 10 guns. But I guess the question is, does that break your immersion not having access to more? If what's the point in having 10 rifles that all do more or less the same thing with just maybe one stat different? Is it better to have it concise? Or
Certainly true of Star Wars because that's pretty much you've got a blaster, a heavy blaster, pistol, and
yeah,
about 2 or 3 other, and then they all do the same thing, and that's why loot's not a big thing in Star Wars because it's like they're all the same. They're all the blasters are the same. So
yeah, and I think there's players and there's groups that love the kind of micromanagement of finding a weapon that does +1 more damage than the last one they had, so they can chuck their old one away and get that new one, or trying to get the funds to get that new one, that kind of thing. But I guess there's also another group that would like the abstraction of you've got a pistol, a rifle, one's fully automatic, one's semi-automatic, and that's your lot. If essentially they all do the same thing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's an interesting one.
Definitely. So you've got career skills, which helps you at the start. It tells you once you've picked your character type, tells you not only your special ability, but it tells you which weapons that you should be having. Sorry, not weapons, what skills you should take. So that helps you. But you've also got pick up skills, and then that does involve reading because it means you're going to flick through and find out other cool skills to add to your kind of list of things. I'm not going to say any more than that about it. And it's the same, like you say, like we were talking about with the weapons, the equipment, and the cybernetics. There's lots of stuff, lots of options. Weapons-wise, the thing I would always say is try and get smart gun links because that helps your accuracy when you're firing a gun. I always like that. There's a bit like the interface plugs you see in the Matrix where, you know how they've got them in their arms where they can plug a cable into their arm. It's a cable that plugs into your arm and plugs into the gun, and it makes the gun feel like it's an extension of your body, which I always thought was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
And I always quite like the cyber optics, which are cybernetics. You got a certain amount of starting funds, so you can buy yourself weapons, equipment, and cybernetics with all that. I always thought this cyber optic as well, when you could have like the target appear over your vision, was a cool idea as well. So they were always things that I kind of gravitated towards myself, and I always loved there was what was that called, that gun? There was a very heavy Armalite 44. That's what it was. That was always my gun of choice because it did massive damage.
Yeah, it's your proper Dirty Harry Magnum.
Yeah, exactly. There is the Colt as well, and they do have the Dirty Harry gun as well.
Well, I think the Armalite 44 is the Dirty Harry one. The Colt AMT is more like a semi-auto pistol.
All right, okay.
For getting into it, but
right, okay, no, I'll take your word for that. Yeah, so there's lots of customization, and you could get lost in the book doing it if you want to. My advice would be have a quick skim through it. If there's something you think's cool, go for it, buy it. As long as your GM, check it with your GM first. I wouldn't go too overboard with the cybernetics, particularly at the start of the game, because it doesn't really give you anywhere to go. I think this is part of the attraction of it for me, is of role playing in general terms, is, you know, that thing when you're improving your character as you go on. And I think if you start off as a tank, what's interesting about that? Not really much. It's the same with those special abilities I was talking about earlier on. I think it's good to have them at a fairly low ability when you start, so you've got somewhere to grow.
Mm-hmm.
You do have the points that if you had enough, you just put everything into your special ability, you could have +10 in it. But that would mean you would start the game as if it was Rocker Boys, for example, that we were talking about earlier on. then you're already like superstars.
Yeah, where do you go?
Yeah, down I suppose is the only way. But I prefer to be up the way, I suppose. So yeah, that to me is one of the things I would say. Don't spam things because you're not going to grow as a character in any way. It's not really as interesting. So yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of just washing over that very quickly about the weapons equipment, the cybernetics, but really there is far too much to say other than you can augment your body to and replace parts. The downside of all this, by the way, every time you're grafting or replacing limbs, you can have replacement limbs and organs, and if you can dream it, it's pretty much there. But the downside is the more tech you strap onto your body or replace human flesh, as it were, you lose humanity in the game, which means once your humanity goes down to zero, then you become a cyber psycho and essentially go on a kill crazy rampage, and the cops are sent out to shoot you down. So that's the one thing you've got to be pretty wary about, is not losing all your humanity. And that's really be all and end all of character creation, hopefully. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Is there anything you want to add, sorry, Craig, before I sign us off here?
No, I think that's us covered. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. So good stuff. So yeah, I'll maybe talk some more about GM and Cyberpunk in future sessions, but I think that really does cover the basics of the game, about what Cyberpunk is. We covered that in the first podcast, and this one about the different teams you can have, the different characters you can have. And I suppose the main thing to just say is to have fun with it, to create something you think is really cool, and yeah, go there to the max with it. Yeah, I mean, I've always seen it as I don't know if I said this in the first one or not, but I've always regarded Cyberpunk as when the action starts, I've always imagined John Woo films where it's like they're diving through windows and they're shooting guns at the same time, or onto trolleys and shooting guns and sliding down banisters, always shooting guns.
As long as you got the rules to back it up, I guess. As long as you don't fumble.
So long as you look cool doing it, that's the main thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to these first few podcasts. And as I say, I'll try and some more with the GM side of things. Maybe talk as well a wee bit from the players as how they should do it. But I think what I've just said there actually covers it pretty well. As a player, you should always just go out to have fun and to be as cool as possible in Cyberpunk, and you won't do much wrong. So anyway, yep, hopefully, I think the next podcast we'll do will probably be Alien, but I will be coming back to Cyberpunk, as I say, to do those GM ones. We'll speak to you soon. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers. Bye.